the first time I saw a tiger pugmark in Cauvery landscape, I was totally thrilled. I can't explain the thrill and the joy I had. And that's what you all work and survive for, right?
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World with me, Ben Goldsmith. Today I'm lucky enough to be with Sanjay Gubbi, all the way from Karnataka in southern India. Sanjay is a conservation and rewilding hero in India. I was lucky enough to sit on a stage with him at an event organised by Elephant Family, which is part of the British Asian Trust, back in the summer, to talk about human-elephant conflict and some of the work that's going on in India to mitigate those problems. Sanjay, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me. It's great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here on your podcast, Ben.
An Indian friend once said to me that you really need two lifetimes. One to explore the world and another one just to explore India. In nature terms, in cultural terms, it is an absolute wonder, an extraordinary tapestry of different ecosystems and different species and so on. I've always found it astonishing that a country of 1.3 billion people and growing, a country that has so many mouths to feed, so much space required by people, still manages to have so much wildlife. In almost every state and every part of India, you find an unbelievable array of wildlife and intact ecosystems. The question I have, Sanjay, is when you were growing up, to what extent did that pose difficulties for you, for your family, for the community you lived in? Was wildlife coexistence and conflict a big part of your upbringing?
Absolutely. I think for a lot of families, a lot of people who grow up in a country like India, wildlife is part of your day-to-day life. So if you even go into every house in India has a small altar within the house. So you'll have a god, which is a snake god, or you'll have a monkey god. So wildlife is part of your daily life. So it's also revered. So that's very important that you grow up in the morning, you go to the altar, small altar within the house, and you actually see wildlife without realizing that it's actually you're praying to a wild animal. So there's so much of wildlife within you, within your upbringing and within your culture, you perhaps don't realize until you start working on wildlife conservation, perhaps. But also the tolerance levels. I belong to a caste called Jains, and right from the time we are born, we are taught that we should not kill any kind of animal. So even when you're a small kid, if you try to squish an ant, you get spanked on your bums, because the entire philosophy of the religion is non-violence. It's the tagline of the religion is live and let live. So it comes within you, you're born with it. So even the logo of the religion is a cow and a tiger drinking out of the same trough. So you grow up with these kind of symbols, so it gets imbibed into you very naturally, Ben.
So how did you, Sanjay, find your way into the world of proactive conservation? What was your career path?
I think sometime in my high school days, I was part of the scouting movement, and I used to go to nature. Scouting movement is all about outdoors. I really owe a lot to Lord Baden-Powell from the Brownsea Island. He came from UK and he brought this movement into India. And that gave a lot of young people and kids to go outdoors. You're part of outdoors, but to get exposed more and more to outdoors, I think that's when I started picking up more about nature and my love for stargazing and then watching birds and camping outdoors. I think that's where the first spark came up. And then I picked up bird watching as a hobby. I went in to do my undergraduation in electrical engineering, which I really didn't enjoy. At some point of time, I wanted to come back to wildlife conservation as a full-time career. And I worked for a few years and I didn't enjoy working as an engineer. So I quit my profession and got back into wildlife conservation way back in 1990 as a full-time profession. And since then, there's never been a dull day in my life.
And did that career in conservation begin in Karnataka?
Absolutely. And I feel I'm going to continue in Karnataka and I'll perhaps die in Karnataka, because conservation is not just about animals. It's also about people. It's about society. You need to really understand a lot. Like I've watched a few episodes of you when you're talking about your farm, about UK, and you know the language, you know the people, you know the culture, you know people, and you need to understand the politics of the society. You need to understand the politics of political leaders and so many other issues to be an effective conservationist. So I think science is important for conservation, but I think 90% is outreach, 90% is communication to get changes on ground in conservation. To be an effective communicator and to be an effective on-ground changer for conservation, it's very ideal that you work in your home state, on your place where you're born and brought up, because a lot of doors open up for you just because you're from that place and you know X, Y, Z, and your family name is known perhaps to a few people. That opens up a lot of doors, and people are more willing and accepting you as a conservationist and also to your ideas about conservation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the importance of working in the place that you really know and understand. Sanjay, when we met, you told me that you'd had a run-in with a leopard during your time as a conservationist. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's one thing which keeps reminding me almost on a daily basis. It was a leopard which had accidentally come into a school about 6 years ago. I was called in by the authorities to capture the leopard and ensure the safety of both the children and the leopard. And in that melee, there were a lot of people who had gathered outside. There was media, there was international media, everybody out there. So the entire incident is on video. Unfortunately, the leopard was very stressed and we were trying to capture him. And I got in the melee, trying to save children's lives. I got caught with the leopard and I was injured. I had about 44 stitches from that day, and the impact continued. But it was an experience where my second life perhaps started. I had to rethink a lot about my own life after that experience, where I saw the leopard roaring right into my ears, a few millimeters away from my ears, and you see death right there. But I'll tell you, when I saw the leopard at such close quarters, I have not seen a better colored eye anywhere else in the world. That beautiful green color of the leopard's eyes, I can never forget it. But it's just that I was injured because the animal was stressed, that's all.
That's an extraordinary story, Sanjay. My God, thank God you're still with us. To what extent have the ecosystems of Karnataka been degraded during your lifetime? And what have been the main causes of that degradation?
See, it's a mixed bag. Some of the habitats have really gained, like forest habitats have gained, while grasslands and scrublands, thorny forests, dry evergreen forests, they have really degraded. And one of the reasons why such habitats have degraded is because of lack of awareness about the value of these ecosystems, both for wildlife and also for people. While forest ecosystems in some way has benefited because there's a lot more awareness about saving forests, about saving megafauna which are found in these forests like tigers and elephants and leopards and other megafauna. But the same way, other wildlife which are also critically endangered, some of them are really in need of conservation attention, like the great Indian bustard, the Indian wolf, the Bengal florican and other species which survive in different ecosystems like grasslands, have also degraded basically because of lack of awareness and loss of habitat and fragmentation. Even today, these three are the biggest problems, and especially lack of awareness. The value of different ecosystems really need to be understood, because nature is very complicated, Ben. I'm sure you know it very well. We need several lifetimes, and even within several lifetimes, I don't think I can understand nature fully. You understand a very small fraction of nature. Science is important, like always I say, but the natural fabric of nature is very complicated, and I think it's much, much beyond science.
Sanjay, can you tell me a little bit about the precise landscape in which you're working? What's it called? What's unique about it? What are you doing there?
We work in two different landscapes. One is the Western Ghats, which runs along the west coast of India. It runs for about 1,600 kilometers all the way from the state of Gujarat down to the tip of the Indian subcontinent. But we mostly work in the state of Karnataka and all along the Western Ghats. It's one of the biodiversity hotspots of the world. And it's got amazing wildlife in it. It's got one of the highest densities of certain species anywhere in the world, right from endemic frog species to the Asian elephants. And within this landscape is also peppered with human habitations. So you need to ensure that there's land security, but also space for both people, but very importantly, also for wildlife. That's one of the landscapes we work. The other landscape we work is the Deccan Plateau, which runs again within several states of the country, especially in the southern and central part of the country. And this formed due to the volcanic eruption during the movement of the tectonic plates. And those are beautiful landscapes, rocky outcrops, huge masses of granite, and with scrub forest, with dry deciduous forest, and home to some of the amazing dry area wildlife species in this country. So these are the two large landscapes we try to work, and that's where our focus is on wildlife conservation.
And the species that exist in those two landscapes are all still there. I understand that India has had very few extinctions. I read that the only mammal extinction is the Malabar civet. I wonder if that's correct, or if you've had to reintroduce species at all.
Yeah, we had the Malabar civet, which has gone extinct. But if you also look at other species, we lost the cheetah, Asiatic cheetah, way back in the early 50s. Very unfortunate. We also lost the Javan rhino. We lost the banting in this country, which used to survive in the northeast of this country. It's a wild cattle species. We have the other wild cattle species, which is called as the gar, which survives and continues to survive and thrive. But the ones which used to be in the Indo-Malayan realm, the banting, unfortunately, we lost it post just before independence, around independence. These are the major species which we lost. But of course, we may not know, or we may not have documented some of the lesser known species or the smaller fauna if they have gone extinct and we don't know. Of course, some of them we have been documented, like the pink-headed duck. We lost, and there are no records of it in the recent times. But India overall has done quite well, in my opinion, about conserving a lot of wildlife species. But we still can do better.
And in the two landscapes where you're working, in the Western Ghats Mountains and in the Deccan Plateau, have you already started to see an increase in abundance of some of the more charismatic species as a result of the mitigation of human-wildlife conflict and increased protection for these lands and increasing the number of corridors and so on?
Absolutely. I mean, that's our whole goal, and that's what motivates us more and more. You know, there are areas where we wouldn't have tigers, species like the tigers, and now tigers are breeding. In one landscape we very intensively work is called as the Cauvery and Mills landscape, and this landscape was ravaged by a bandit for over 3 decades called Veerappan, and we started, and he was killed way back in 2005, and after that we started working in that landscape, and we almost didn't have documents of tigers in that landscape, but now tigers are breeding in that landscape, and that's the most satisfying thing for a conservationist. I'm sure you would also enjoy that, you would agree and enjoy about it, to see animals coming back to a landscape which was ravaged for various reasons. I think that's the most satisfying and the rewarding thing for us. I'm sure it's like a beaver coming back to your land in Somerset. The first time I saw a tiger pugmark in Cauvery landscape, I was totally thrilled. I can't explain the thrill and the joy I had. And that's what you all work and survive for, right? You know, that small pleasure of seeing animals coming back to the area where you had not documented those animals. And that's your whole life's mission.
Yeah, absolutely. The joy of species returning to their former range is really, it's pure magic. You know, we talked about beavers when we last met. You know, the keystone of all keystone species in the Northern Hemisphere. You know, water is life, and beavers, by damming up the little streams and creeks in a river system, hold water in the landscape. And the magic that comes with that is really something to see. I hope I'll show you sometime. This summer we had glowworms for the first time in our valley, and seemingly as a direct result of the return of beavers, because the glowworms are all strung on a dark night in the summer above the beaver wetlands that have been created. So I couldn't agree more. And we have wild boarback now in Britain, which is another species that plays a keystone role as a gardener in the forest, and been extinct for a long time, but they're now in good numbers in the west and south of Scotland, in the Welsh borders, and even a few clinging on in the southwest and starting to expand. So the return of these species really is incredibly important. And the One Earth Foundation produced a report recently which suggested that restoring just 20 species to their former range would have the potential to restore a third of the world's landmass to ecological health. And they used examples such as returning beavers in the Northern Hemisphere, returning bison to the Great American grasslands, and so on.
Yes, that's the magic, Ben. That's the magic. When you said glowworms, it need not be tigers all the time. It need not be elephants all the time. As small as a glowworm also brings in the same amount of joy. I can see that when you're talking about glowworms coming back to because of beavers, that's the spark in a conservationist. That's what is a true conservationist. You mentioned about glowworm. It may not be the most charismatic. It's not a gorilla. It's not a forest elephant. It's not the bison. It's not the Yellowstone wolf. But a glowworm itself brings so much of joy. That's the magic of conservation. When you allow natural processes to happen, you need not reintroduce them, but you do allow natural processes to come back. And then all these pleasures and all this joy and all these wonderful life forms come back. It can be glowworms, it can be butterflies, it can be beetles, all the way up to elephants. That's the pleasure of seeing animals back, birds singing back in your farmland, birds, songbirds coming back to rural Britain or to any other part of the world. That's the pleasure of getting back. It's called life, that's what life is all about.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know if you've ever seen footage of a dolphin or a fish swimming through bioluminescence in the sea on a dark night. But this is what keystone species do on land. When you restore native cattle or beavers or wild boar to a British landscape, it's like they create life in their wake. It's like the bioluminescence that follows them. And glowworms are a very beautiful illustration of that. We suddenly saw these flickering lights hanging like magic above the beaver wetland, and it was quite a moment. Has the joy of wildlife returning in abundance in the landscapes that you're working in been something that's been shared by local communities? Now, are the local school children aware of what's happening around them? And I guess more importantly, are they able to derive any economic and social prosperity and security from it?
Yeah, it's a long drawn process. You have two questions in what you just mentioned. One is, have local children enjoyed it? I would like to say, unfortunately, no. That's what one of our key goals is. We have established the first ever rural nature information center in the area we work. It's all about wildlife. It's a beautifully made nature information center called the Holemati Nature Information Center. And till now, we have had about 15,000 kids who live along with tigers, who live with elephants, who have always seen leopards and elephants and tigers as cattle lifters or as crop raiders. Unlike other people who look at elephants or tigers as cuddly animals, they look at the viewpoint of these kids are completely different. And that's what we are trying to change, the perspectives and the behavior and the attitudes. And slowly there's a big change, especially when you start demonstrating what is in their backyards, which they had not seen it in a positive light all these years. And when you show benefits, how it benefits them directly, the bees coming back or the bees pollinating their pumpkins or their farmland, other kind of crop species, which they would have missed because due to perhaps some amount of lack of awareness. So that's one of our main goals, bringing back the value of wildlife to people who really suffer the cost of conservation.
And of course, economic incentives make a huge difference as well. When I was in India last, I felt an increase in prosperity as I approached Ranthambore National Park, for example, as if somehow this large area of intact nature was a generator of wealth and prosperity for communities surrounding it. Is that the case where you work, that nature can lift people up in an economic sense?
Absolutely. When we started our research work in this landscape, one of the things we saw was degradation of habitat due to collection of firewood by people who are using firewood for cooking and also for heating water. So we designed a way that we would provide them alternatives for firewood. And what we also demonstrated to them is how much more productive they can be if they stop going into the forest to collect firewood. We did a survey of 5,000 people, and we saw that people were especially women, were spending 800 hours a year just collecting firewood. 800 hours would actually translate to about 32 days in a year just collecting firewood. And when we provided them with alternatives, now they're using those 800 hours to other productive activities like farming or for agricultural labor or for small businesses or small dairy production activities. And that has made a huge difference in their lives. So the economics has, stopping collecting firewood has brought in more prosperity for them and also for their families. And also some of the unintended and also some of the most surprising benefits was that women telling that they're able to send their kids to school on time now, because earlier cooking on firewood would take them hours, and now it takes only about 20 minutes, and the children are able to go to school on time. These are all unseen benefits of wildlife conservation. We are doing it because they were collecting firewood, the tree species which were fed by elephants and sloth bear and samba deer and other. That was our goal. But we never realized just by trying to help wildlife, we could help girl children go to school. We could help boys go to school on time, and there could be economic prosperity just by providing a small alternative. These are the magic which we never understand.
Yes, Sanjay, you use the term we. When you talk about we, you mean Holomati Foundation. Can you tell me a little bit about the foundation and what its mission is and how it came about? This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com.
It's a small grassroots organization, but we have enormous amount of background of having on-ground successes in the state of Karnataka. We have helped government defragment a lot of wildlife habitats, like diverting highways, big highways from protected areas, so that wildlife get more spaces. We have also ensured that whenever we work on conservation, we do it in a way which is socially acceptable, politically feasible, and scientifically evaluated. So though science is an important part of our work, we try to ensure that we work with a vast variety of stakeholders, which is very important in conservation. It is not just wildlife as a science. It is not just about local communities, but you also need to work with political leaders. You need to work with social leaders. You need to work with media personnel. You need to work with religious leaders. You need to work with a lot of different kinds of stakeholders who both directly and indirectly benefit from conservation in different ways. And you need to ensure that you work with the system. That's what I mean. You need not be an activist. You need not be just a scientist. If you have flexibility of listening to people and working and waiting at the doorsteps of political leaders, the change you bring in is enormous. That is what Holemati specializes in. We go beyond science. We go beyond the regular stakeholders of conservation. And we evaluate it scientifically. That's what is key for us.
So Holomati Foundation is active in these two mega landscapes in India, and it's a large cohort of people working on all these different issues, from poaching to human-wildlife conflict to alternatives to firewood from the forest to the protection of corridors and so on. How is the organization funded? Are you funded by the government of India, by the state of Karnataka, or by philanthropy?
We largely rely on philanthropy, though the state of Karnataka supports us in a small way to work on science and also on human-wildlife conflict. But we largely rely on philanthropy. Thankfully, a lot of people, especially people from Britain, the British Asian Trust, the Elephant Family, the Whitley Fund for Nature, these are all some of our biggest supporters in the past and also in currently. And some of the individuals like Ganesh Ramani, Ruth, and a lot of other people, even in Britain, are big supporters of our work. And that's what keeps our work going.
And of course, you have this wonderful tailwind of working among communities who keep harmony with nature at the absolute core of their spiritual and their practical lives. And that's why I've often thought that India can show the world how to have development and prosperity and stability with a large population in conjunction with respect and harmony with nature. That is true also of the so-called forest people within your patch, the indigenous communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm an indigenous Kannadiga. I come from the state of Karnataka. I'm born here. I speak my local language, Kannada, and that's what makes you very accepted in the community. You walk into a community, you know how it works, and you speak the language, and that makes a huge difference. But of course, the tolerance of people is very important. The commitment of government is extremely important. I know, people are very averse to work with governments, not just in India, perhaps in many other parts of the world. But you can't change that system. You need to work with the system. That's what is very important. So governments, it's not that every government is corrupt and every government official is disinterested in good things for the society. There are a lot of people within the government and a lot of government bureaucrats who are interested and who are committed to good causes of the society. It's just that we need to know how to work with them, how to raise their interest in conservation. Every time you need not go to a political leader saying that you want to protect tiger. You would speak to him in a language that he understands and respects. When I go to a political leader, I talk about water security for his constituency. That's what triggers his interest when I talk about nature conservation. To some people, you have a different pitch altogether. That's why I always keep saying outreach is an extremely important part of conservation. You need to speak the language. You need to tell them what is the value, and you need to tell it in a way that they not just understand but also appreciate. That's where communication and outreach is such an important part of it. And I'm sure your podcast also does it very effectively.
Sanjay, you mentioned the bandit. The famous bandit who for 30 years ravaged the landscape as a poacher with a network of poachers. With the capture of that bandit, and has that brought an end to poaching in your landscape, or is this an ongoing enforcement process?
See, he used to poach a lot of elephants for the tusk and sandalwood. And of course, that has come down with his demise, the infamous bandit called Veerappan. But poaching certainly continues to be a big threat. We just had a scientific paper which came out in a very reputed journal called the Biological Conservation. And there we have demonstrated how snares are impacting endangered species. So we have scientifically provided data that snares are impacting even non-target species. Those snares are set for catching ungulates for consumption and also local sales, but they're also impacting species like elephants, dholes, which are the Indian Asiatic wild dogs, the leopard, the tiger, the sloth bears, and several other species. So certainly poaching continues to be a threat, and that needs to be addressed in different forms. Perhaps, educating communities is an important way forward, but also enforcement is very important in this with this threat.
Sanjay, which is a priority species for you right now? Which creature would you like to see return in a full more abundance? I've always had a fascination with the gaur, the Indian bison, and the European bison, of course, was down to just a dozen or even fewer individuals, and is now recovering quite nicely in Europe. We have probably 10,000 or so bison from Ukraine all the way to the Iberian Peninsula, and even a small herd now in Kent in the south of England. Can you tell me a little bit about that species and about whichever species is most exciting for you right now?
You picked up a very nice species. It's the Arnold Schwarzenegger of the ungulate world. The Indian gaur is really like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But it doesn't go to gym. It doesn't use any of the protein supplements. There's nothing which has to support it to pump up its biceps. Such a massive species, 1 ton weighing ungulate, and survives only on eating grass and leaves and fruits. That's the lesson for the world. Like, you don't need protein supplements. You perhaps don't need meat to have such massive biceps. Once you see a gaur, you really fall in love with that species. You really picked up a wonderful species. Brown coat, shining with white stockings. I think it's a perfect ungulate according to me. I love that species. I love watching it. It's majestic. It's really bullish. I wish the gaur was the symbol of the New York Stock Exchange rather than the bull.
Sanjay, I've always been fascinated by the gaur, the Indian bison. I once saw a small herd of them at a distance in Periyar, and I never forgot it. And of course, our own European bison was decimated in past centuries. Fewer than a dozen animals remained at the start of the 20th century, and they've made a steady and quite impressive recovery. There's probably 10,000 bison now between Ukraine and the Iberian Peninsula. In fact, we even have our own herd of them here in England, in Kent. I went to visit them during the summer. How is the gaur doing in your landscape and generally across its range?
Gaur is a very important keystone. It's an umbrella species because you really need large landscapes. It needs fodder. It needs fodder in good quantities. So it can't survive in small fragments of forest. It really needs contiguous habitats like the elephant does. And it's also a shy species. So it doesn't, like in some areas of India, elephants survive amidst tea plantations and amidst coffee plantations, but gaur doesn't do very well in such disturbed habitats, though they survive there. So I would say in the landscape we work, there are anywhere between 500 to 800 gaur, especially in the Cauvery MML hills landscape. But across the country, I'm sure there are about 20,000 to 25,000 gaur still left in this country. But if you go to Southeast Asia, gaur's population has really decimated, largely because of hunting or poaching for the pot. You go to just across the country, you go to Myanmar, or you go to places like Thailand, Indonesia, the gaur population is really less. Malaysia, the gaur population has really plummeted. But that's key for recovery of species like the tiger.
Sanjay, which species is in need of your particular attention right now?
There's a lot of species which I would love to see that they do well in this country. But one particular species, which is, I'm not sure if it continues to survive in this state of Karnataka, but that species is the caracal. Caracal survives in very small pockets in India, in Rajasthan and in Gujarat. But there are historical records of caracal being in Karnataka. And we've just started some work in northern part of Karnataka. And I don't know, from our work, through our scientific work, if we ever get to document a caracal. I just love that species. That's a very graceful animal. It's a smaller cat, but a very graceful, and you just love those ears, with the tufty ears, ears. I've seen a caracal in Africa, but I would love to see caracals come back and do well in our country as well. It's one of those magnificent cats you can see in the wild, actually.
Sanjay, you're a complete hero. I feel so lucky to have spent this time with you. You are leading an effort to protect and restore life across two of the most important and biodiverse landscapes in the world. If anyone listening to this podcast wants to visit one of these landscapes, what's the best way to do that?
Come down to Karnataka. We always would love to have people who are interested in wildlife. People are very open, and there are wonderful places where people can even walk, trek, or go on a hike and watch gaur. Especially Ben, if you want to watch gaur, you should go to Kudremukh National Park and on foot. I'll tell you very honestly, watching large mammals on foot is the most exciting thing that can happen to you. If you watch gaur at a distance of 20 meters from you and you are able to see it and hear its breathing, I'll tell you that's the best moment. I was walking in Ranthambore National Park doing some work early morning, and I and a friend of mine, we were walking, and then I just thought I saw something on my left, and I stopped, and through the edge of my eyes, or left eye, I saw there was actually a tiger sitting right there about 10 meters away from us. So I squeezed my friend's hand and I whispered to him saying, "Tiger, tiger." And we stopped, both of us froze. And this tiger was about 10 to 12 meters away from us, sitting and gazing at us. And I looked into its eye. I think that's the best moment I've ever seen. Ever in my life, seeing a tiger 10 meters away from you, and it watched at us, and I could actually hear its breathing, we were so close. And that moment was so exciting. The tiger stood there and we stood there. We watched each other for a short period, and then I took my eye off the animal, and I knew that she was staring at us, and I knew what was happening because I could watch it through the corner of my eye. And I think wildlife understands you. If you mean no harm, and if you're very calm when you see wildlife at such close quarter, I think they get your vibes. They get your good vibes. They get a very positive vibe. So this female tiger, which was sitting there, watched us for a few moments. Then she very slowly got up, walked away for about 20 meters, stood there, and I was looking at her. She looked back at us as though perhaps very disdainfully. It was an early morning, and she was sunning herself. It's in Rajasthan, very cold in January morning, and she must have been sunning, and she must have thought, what a horrible human being who disturbed me my early morning sunning. And then she quietly walked away from us, and in a few minutes she disappeared into the bushes. I'll tell you, watching that pumps you up forever. That moment I can never forget. That I can hear her even today. And those are the kinds of moments which will pump you up forever to do whatever possible in your lifetime, or whatever little possible in your lifetime to do to save these charismatic animals in your backyard. And as you rightly said in the beginning, you need several lifetimes to enjoy them, but also to save them.
Sanjay, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for hosting me, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
I feel so privileged to have shared a stage earlier this year with Sanjay here in London, and to have spent this time speaking with him. Sanjay is one of a few inspiring conservation rewilding leaders that are making India a real example of how you can have development, prosperity, and lots of people, lots of pressure on the land, and still lots of habitat, lots of wildlife woven in. I really think India offers an example to the rest of the world, and Sanjay's project is one of the best in the whole of southern India. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd be very grateful if you go onto whatever platform you use, spread the word, leave us a review. Next time I'm going to be talking to Dragana Miluznic from the Nature Conservancy. Dragana was born in Belgrade and is working on a project known as the Blue Heart of Europe, which is an effort to save an area of the Balkans comprised of wild, free-flowing rivers, some of which even flow turquoise. These rivers have been threatened by dams and other development, and Dragana is leading the campaign to have them protected in perpetuity.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about the series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species: bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.